Happy New Year. Welcome to Carousel. For our first show of the new year, first we wish you health and happiness for 2013. We hope your holidays went well and we're happy. Our first show for the new year is we're going to introduce a new idea for the new year. One that will stimulate jobs, one that will take an old building that's not being used and actually put it back into use and give it a second life. And third, also we're going to be growing crops inside this building with no soil. Very innovative. Thank you for being at Carousel. I am your host, Scott Albertson, and we welcome to Carousel, first time, Mr. Steve Domian. Hey, Steve.
Hey, how are you?
He is the founder of Metro Crops.
Co-founder.
Co-founder, sorry. That's right. Yeah, chief cook bottle washer.
That's it.
And then the main CEO is your wife, Nancy.
There you go.
Right. And Steve and Nancy are from Norwalk, so it's very local specific, if you will. And this is a very exciting idea of what Steve and Nancy have come up with. And we also have back on Carousel, welcome back, Ms. Daphne Dixon.
Nice to see you.
Thank you, Daphne, for being back here again.
Sure.
And Daphne is here because Daphne is the liaison. She's the connection of why Steve and I have crossed paths, because of Daphne's green market and green, Live Green. We've had Daphne on for Live Green. And just because she's such an advocate for the environmental aspect of what we need to do better in our lives. So first we're going to start with Steve. Thank you for being here.
I love it.
And Happy New Year.
Yes.
Now Steve has brought his lettuce, if you haven't figured that out. Look at this green stuff in the
my
middle.
children here.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this is Clyde. This is Harry.
That's it. Yes,
exactly.
my children.
So let's talk about Metro Crops, because that's truly one of the main reasons why we're doing this interview. Now, Steve and Nancy have a website called metrocrops.com, www. And take it away. Tell us a little bit about Metro Crops and where the idea came from.
Well, you know, as is often the case, when you think back on something and you say, you know, when was the first time we thought about this? That's already been lost to history a little bit. It sort of builds.
Sure.
But you know, when I was a real little kid, I lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Okay.
Unfortunately, when they built I-95, they tore my house down, so my parents had to move. But you know, we drive through Bridgeport all the time on I-95, and us, like everybody else, we see all these empty buildings.
Sure.
And you just think, can't something be done with these old buildings?
Sure, exactly.
You
Give
know?
them another life, absolutely.
And so it was in thinking about that, and then, you know, fortuitously started talking to some people. I thought it was an unrelated conversation about farming and plants and growing local.
Sure.
And why can't we get fresh lettuce in Connecticut in January? And this stuff looks awful. Where on earth did it come from? You know, it's, oh, Mexico. Well, gee, you know, poor thing's been traveling for 2 weeks.
Sure.
And so I started to put all that together of, you know, is it possible to do this?
Sure.
Went to Yukon, talked to some people up there, and then slowly, you know, it kind of came together. Honestly, when I look back now, it's amazing, you know.
Give you a little information at home about Metro Crops and about this lettuce that you see on the interview today. This lettuce is grown without soil. Make that very clear. It's all hydroponically grown. It's grown in this white tray that you see. And the whole idea of what Steve and Nancy have come up with is the fact that they're going to take an old building over. We're talking specifically about Bridgeport. We're going to take an old building over, give it a whole new life, put people to work, and actually grow this lettuce inside the buildings, use a special light, no soil, and what is it, a 16-day?
26 days.
26-day growing period?
26 days.
And then actually, you know, get it out and to market and all that. But it's more the idea, and this is where the true excitement comes for me, is the fact that A, because you're reutilizing buildings that are just sitting there, you know, collecting dust and falling down. Secondly, you're putting people to work, which we certainly need that, no question about that. And secondly, you're thirdly, and you're doing this inside a building with no soil, and you're maximizing time, energy, land, the whole deal. I mean, it's such a win-win-win all the way around.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
The thing I'm most impressed about with this whole remarkable venture is that not only is Steve and Nancy, not only are they creating jobs, they're growing organic lettuce, and they're bringing Bridgeport back to life in
Sure.
a fashion that is reminiscent of Bridgeport of old. But as far as their electricity usage and the way they're powering their whole business, that also is a spectacular part of the story.
Okay,
You
so
know,
tell me a little bit
well,
about
Steve
that,
knows
please.
much more about that, but when we were getting ready for Green Drinks the other day, when Steve was coming to visit, I got a few emails from people who were, they loved the idea of Metro crops, but they were concerned with the electricity usage and how is all of this wonderful lettuce being grown,
Right.
and how good is it if it's using electricity that potentially is coming from, coal burning
Right.
plants and things like that.
Right.
So, Steve, do you
Yeah.
want to talk about that? Because to me, that is just
Yeah, well, I mean,
the icing on the lettuce,
we. Okay,
One
or
layer.
maybe the salad dressing, right?
but I'm bummed. The first thing that I think people have to stop and think about is that we've all seen these beautiful pictures of the San Joaquin Valley, of these beautiful farms where we're growing all this stuff.
Sure.
And what we need to understand is that, for sure, as the world's population continues to grow, that is not the solution.
Right.
Okay? Dr. Despommier from Columbia, in his book, The Vertical Farm, first off, I learned from him that we are already using 70% of the world's potable water for agriculture.
Wow.
So when the population
astounding.
doubles, you can't double 70%. Okay, we
right.
can't use 140%.
Sure.
Okay, that's the first thing. The other thing is when the Earth's population doubles, we would have to add agricultural land the size of the country of Brazil.
Whoa.
Okay, well that's not going to happen. I don't want that to happen. I don't want the rainforest cut down so we grow lettuce.
Right.
Okay, so first off, there's got to be another solution.
Right.
Okay, and we think that potentially part of that solution is growing indoors in urban areas, so we
Sure.
don't have to cut down forests.
Sure.
Okay, but Daphne is right. There's an energy issue here. Okay, we have to fight the demon of energy when we
Right.
grow these things. Okay, when I carry this tray of lettuce out to the car, that is the first time these guys have ever seen sunlight. Okay,
Right.
and so we have an electric bill, right? Now, I went to a farming gathering of young and old farmers, traditional farmers up in Granby, Connecticut.
Okay.
About a year ago. And somebody asked me, they said, well, what do you guys do? And we said, I said, we grow lettuce indoors under lights. And he said, wow, growing lettuce under electric lights doesn't sound very sustainable to me, Well, the first thing is that electricity by itself, right, is neither sustainable or not sustainable. It's a form of energy.
Right.
So it comes down to how do you make the electricity.
Right.
Okay. We know that if we make electricity using solar power, it's very sustainable. It's
Sure.
totally clean. It's zero emissions, everything else. So,
Sure.
So it's appropriate. Where are we getting our electricity from? And more importantly, we're a research facility right now. Okay. So the big question is, when we move to Bridgeport, where are we going to get the electricity from?
Right.
And people that we show how we're doing what we do so that they go do it. So that they go do it in Detroit and in Toledo and in Cleveland and in
Right.
Quebec and in New Bedford and in Buffalo. How are they going to get their electricity?
Sure.
Well, the really neat thing is where we are up in Stores, we're actually off the main campus. We're on something that UConn calls the Depot campus. It's kind of a collection of derelict buildings that Connecticut owned, didn't know what to do with, so of course you give it to the State University and say, here, you guys, free
Sure.
buildings, and they don't know what to do with them either. So we lease space in that building. Well, it turns out that those parts of those buildings are actually powered by a fuel cell. A fuel cell is a device that makes electricity with hydrogen and oxygen.
Okay.
Okay, it doesn't burn anything. Fuel cells really came about when we were going to the moon, and that's the way Apollo made electricity.
Would you then have water as a byproduct
Yeah,
after that comes
and you
in?
have water. Okay,
Right.
so you have water. Now,
H2O, right?
yeah, exactly. Now, it turns out that it's very difficult commercially right now in the world to have a fuel cell that runs on hydrogen and oxygen.
Okay.
You can get the oxygen because there's oxygen in the atmosphere. There's
Right.
lots of it.
Yes.
Hydrogen, not so. And you can't just run a pipe to your fuel cell with hydrogen because there's nobody at the other end of the pipe. I mean, we don't sell hydrogen in those large quantities.
Right.
So a source of hydrogen is natural gas.
Okay.
It's got hydrogen in it. It can be used as that source of hydrogen.
Okay.
Now, the fuel cell doesn't burn it. Okay, it uses it as a source of hydrogen. However, because of the composition of natural gas, the fuel cell now does produce carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Okay, and if we care about the planet, giving off carbon dioxide is not good.
It's one of the
Even
main
if
gases in the
sure,
car.
yeah, it's even if it's only a little bit, it's
Sure.
not good.
Right.
We should aim for zero.
Right.
Well, when United Technologies installed the fuel cell where we are, they ran a pipe underground from the fuel cell, which is about 400 feet away, to our building, and in fact, it's coming up to our lab.
All right.
And we've got 2 UConn School of Engineering interns who are hopefully feverishly working over winter break, building this thing so that they are actually capturing the exhaust out of the fuel cell and pumping it to our building.
Okay.
And these guys are starved for carbon dioxide, as all plants are.
Right.
Literally starved for it. They can actually use much more than is in the atmosphere. It's a limiting factor.
Okay.
So they are going to absorb all of that carbon dioxide, and all they give off is oxygen when
Right.
they do photosynthesis.
Right.
So when you marry the fuel cell with our building, with our lab,
Okay.
suddenly we've got a totally green setup, right?
And then
there's
the bi-
no emissions whatsoever,
Right.
except for oxygen, which is kind of a nice thing.
Right, and then the byproduct is you get oxygen from the
Exactly.
growing of the
and
plant.
we can actually use the water that the fuel cell produces also, because it is totally pure, nothing but 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen. It's H2O, that's it.
Right, so now you're getting not
and-
only the oxygen, but now you're getting the
Absolutely.
water.
Absolutely, and we can use the electricity.
And
it
we
also
can use the
produces
water.
heat. We can use the heat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a home run.
Yeah, so it's a win-win-win,
Yes.
win-win-win-win all the way down.
And so, fuel cells are pretty clean devices. They're not perfect, and then when you marry them with us, they're almost perfect.
Next question then would be, when we talked a little bit, backtrack a little bit. Live Green, Connecticut, which was the 3rd annual, which was September 15th and 16th
Which Steve was at.
of 2012, right? Which is, right, we had you on the program with Scott Weicker, I'm sorry. And that's when I first met Steve
Right.
and Nancy, and I had a long conversation with you. My question amongst all the conversation was, is this type of idea now applicable to other plants? And your answer was, I remember we talked about this specifically.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody who's in the fuel cell business,
Right.
and he said, it might turn out, that if we put together these clusters that are now being called microgrids, which, you have had some people
We had a panel on microgrids. Yes.
at the GME, is it might turn out that when we assemble this microgrid, we might deliberately have to incorporate some kind of a farm just because we got this great way to absorb carbon dioxide and produce oxygen.
So
That's a good
this
idea.
truly is an idea where I'm formulating this in my head, where it's truly ground floor. Ground floor, knowing you've got X, Y, Y, and Z, but through all those factors, now all of a sudden you've got all these other factors that are come involved, which are certainly beneficial all the way around. So you have ideas of where this is going, but this has got huge potential.
Yeah,
Huge potential.
And the fact is, we've gotten, because of Daphne's introduction, we've gotten really technical here.
Right.
And there's plenty of room for that. I mean,
Sure.
there's no question. And then there's even a part of this that's very non-technical. It's
Right.
intuitively obvious
Right.
that driving lettuce in a truck from California is not really efficient.
Right.
Okay, there are staggering numbers. The USDA has just discovered, they've never kept track of it. There are estimates that say that we lose 40%
Right.
of the food we produce in that whole
Just through
process.
transportation.
Well, transportation
Yeah.
and the harvesting
Yeah.
and we've all seen it. The lettuce comes
Right.
in, it's on a refrigerated truck, but it's a hot day and it sits on the loading dock for a couple hours, and then all that stuff. staggering waste. I mean, imagine we're trying to feed the world and we're throwing away 40% of it.
I know.
You know, so that whole local thing,
Right.
right? The local thing that we can be growing the lettuce down the street.
Sure.
You know.
I want to add this in because we're halfway into the interview. I have some photos that I took on Tuesday night. Now this is part of the connection of the three of us. Is Daphne has this social green mixer, if you will,
Yeah.
and I call it social green mixer with a mission
Yeah.
that she has on once a month in Stanford. So we're going to show the photos as we're talking here, because I was at the one that was in Fairfield. There's two. One's in Stanford once a month, and there's one in Fairfield once a month. Now the one in Fairfield, you just celebrated your 4th
We did.
year anniversary doing it this past Tuesday,
That's correct.
and which was January 8th. So point is that we have some photos we're going to show here because I went to the mixer. It was so much fun. There's no charge, and
Right.
for that particular one on January 8th, it's at a place called The Shack, and it's right on the Post Road in Fairfield. If you go onto Facebook for Daphne, you can get information. The next one is January 23rd, which is in Stanford, in downtown Stanford, and it's from 6 to 9. And then the next one back in Fairfield is February 5th, which is the first Tuesday of the month. So point is that anybody can come, it's no charge, and the idea, this one we just involved, and you're seeing the photos, is from January 8th, and we highlighted Steve and Nancy and the lettuce. But with Daphne, she brings different people, different organizations each time she does the mixer, and it's purely about education and bringing people together. It's a fun event. It's very
Yeah.
upbeat, and you know you get to meet people like
Well,
Steve and
I'm
Nancy,
saying,
and
and-
cutting edge of what's going on
You
out
know,
there.
and the education and the fun is in the people.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
I
Well,
mean,
that's the
it's
whole
such,
point.
It's such a cross section. I
Sure.
mean, if I gave you a list of the people that I talked to on Tuesday night, it's unbelievable. I mean, I would never get that group of people together in any other place.
Right. It's like what I do in the music when I go out and perform. I mean, I could sing in the shower at home, and the only one that's going to hear it is my dog. But when you're out performing, you just never know. It's very, very akin. It's very parallel. You just never know who you're going to meet, and you're really putting the word out there.
Yeah.
And you're kind of just tossing
Yeah.
it to the wind and letting the wind take
Yeah.
you where. But then you come and meet people like Daphne, for example, who really dig what you're doing. No pun intended. And they really get charged by what you're doing. And Daphne's
Yeah.
a wonderful proponent for environmental education anyway.
Yep.
I mean, we were talking about this off camera. She has over 70 businesses and different organizations that you've come across now with doing the green drinks and all that.
Yeah, we've had over 70 businesses and organizations. And, every green drinks is different. you
Right,
know?
absolutely.
Right.
And,
yeah, that's right.
But
so
as
it's
you,
fun.
as you can see with the photos as they're rolling and we're talking, it's fun. It's a mixer. It's just people coming
Yeah.
together. You even had, which I thought was kind of interesting, you even had some folks that come on the photos from Sacred Heart University. You had a promoter there
Yeah, well,
to educate people about the university.
Yeah, well, Sacred Heart it's a local business,
Right.
local nonprofit,
Right.
but they also have 2 certificate programs that teach people about sustainability.
Right.
So
See?
they were there
It's all
talking about
connected.
that.
And there's an education facility, and there's also with your connection to Yukon, because you have
Yeah.
what you were describing. You have the facility up in Yukon that you're utilizing
Yeah.
to get this off the ground, so to speak. So it's all connected, but it's really wonderful. You can find Daphne on Facebook, Daphne Dixon, and also 2 events that I've been hooked up with you is Live Green Connecticut, which will be September what
September
this year?
14th and 15th.
This year of
This year.
2013, it'll be back down at Taylor Farms property.
right.
Right here in Norwalk,
And you'll be
Connecticut.
performing,
God willing.
and you'll be exhibiting.
Absolutely.
God willing. And also, Green Market Exposition, I would suspect you're going to have that because that's where I saw you again
that's
this
right.
back to October, and that was in
right.
Bridgeport.
Yeah.
And through you, had a chance to meet Mayor Bill Finch of Bridgeport,
Oh, he's
who was
amazing.
such a great guy,
Yeah.
very charismatic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm sure, we were talking about this off camera, I'm sure that he's really digging this idea.
Yeah. Well, his bachelor's degree is from UConn in the College of Agriculture.
Oh, see, I didn't know that, see?
So
It's really all connected.
Yep.
Give us a little idea, You were talking, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but there's a doctor that you're working with the USDA. Just give us a little bit about where he fits into that process, because now you're getting the ground paperwork going and trying to get USDA certified and all that. So just give us a little idea, please.
You know, Steve Britz, Dr. Britz, has, I guess he's been at the USDA for, I think, about 30 years.
Okay.
And when we were first starting this, I saw that some researcher from the USDA had delivered a talk to some group of engineers about ultraviolet lights and LEDs and growing lettuce or something. And I thought, well, you know, I could go, got his name now, I'll go look him up on the USDA directory, which is like, you know, 5,000 pages long.
Sure.
Call his office, and maybe I can get a copy of his report or something, you know. So I called. And the first time I called him, you know, voice at the other end says, hello. And we talked for 3 hours.
See, you never know.
And we
Just
talked
put it
for
out
3
there.
hours.
Yeah.
And here he's been doing a lot of research in phytonutrients, in lettuce, in lighting.
Okay.
What helps a lot is him and I both have this kind of kooky sense of humor. So when we get together, we laugh a lot and get a lot of work done. And so he's really the research grant that we got from the Department of Agriculture. He's really the plant expert that that is on our project. I mean, it's not like he's on our salary or anything. We don't pay him. He works for the Department of Agriculture, and you know, he's a public servant. He's there to serve people out there who are trying to do what we're trying to do.
Sure.
But you know, he has been a tremendous help. Dr. Britz is, it's funny, we actually had close, we could have bumped into each other several times. We're almost exactly the same age. You know, Nancy and I were going to Northeastern University in Boston at the same time he was at Harvard getting his undergraduate.
That's something.
And then the year we got married, he got married. And then he came down, I believe his PhD work was at Yale.
Okay.
So when I first started talking to him, he said, no, I understand what the empty factory buildings look like in industrial Connecticut.
Sure.
You know, I understand that.
Sure.
And so he's kept us out of trouble. And you know, he's the guy that really understands this stuff.
Sure. And that was the interesting part of doing the Green Market Exposition with Daphne and yourself, and it was October 25th of 2012, right? And because I got a chance to meet Bill, Mayor Bill, and but he's just so enthusiastic, and boy, talk about an undertaking. I mean, you've got a tremendous undertaking with this, but talk about turning a cruise liner around on one screw. I mean, he's trying to resurrect a town, a city that went broke, you know, and you've got all this going on with, you got abandoned buildings and everything else going on. But this, because it is all connected, this is really terrific. And I knew Bill, just by talking with him, meeting him, would just really jump on this.
Tell you something interesting that I have, one of the joys of all of this is the people that we've met when we talk about Metro Crops and everything. If I get a little bit tired and I get a little bit burned out, I just need to go talk to a couple of them and I'm energized.
Yeah.
I mean, there was this couple Tuesday evening at Green Drinks.
Yeah, they're
and
delightful.
I talked to them for a really long time, and finally I said, have you tasted the lettuce yet? And we had this big long conversation, and there was almost always a line to taste the lettuce, you know. And I said, she said, no, we haven't. I said, well, get over there, right? I got a chance. Go to Laura right now. So they did, and they came back and they said, oh, it tastes delicious. It's wonderful. And we want to thank you so much for doing this.
See?
We hope you're successful. We think this is a wonderful idea. When I went to Green Market Expo, an industrial engineer came up to me, and he said, I've worked in this area my whole life. I set up factory buildings.
Sure.
And he said, I drive through Bridgeport, and I've said, why can't we find a use for these buildings? He said, when you're ready to go, he said, you call me. He said, you don't have to pay me. He said, I'm going to do what I know how to do. He said, I'm going to set up that building. There is truly an empathy in much of Fairfield County to try and help Bridgeport get back on
Sure.
track.
There's a real sense of community.
There really is.
And people want
Yeah,
Bridgeport to
they want
succeed. They do.
Bridgeport to
Yeah.
succeed, you know?
There's a theorem that I've had, I just learned it through my life, is that if you're on the right path of your life, and the only one that's ever going to know that is you, if you're on the right path of your life, life will give you what you need to do to get where you have to go. The doors will open as you go along, and that's exactly what you're describing. And see,
Yeah.
that's what ends up happening, because I meet Daphne, right, and I perform down Live Green, Connecticut, and then it just starts to morph into a whole nother direction. I meet you, now you're on the program, and we're talking about
Yeah.
this. That's how it works. It's almost effortless. It just, boop, it just happens, but it's not happening. It's not just happening by happenstance. It's because you're on the right path. You're going and you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're making the right steps. Before we go, we need to do a taste testing. 'Cause
Okay.
We're getting towards the end of the interview. So,
So, help yourself.
well, ladies first.
Do I just dive in there? Or
Here's
Sure,
your-
ladies first.
so I'm just grabbing.
Go right
There's
ahead.
some.
I like this cup.
Go right
So
ahead.
I just pull it out.
Yeah, just tear it off.
Okay.
You already know what it's like. Nick, you want some?
Yeah, but
Oh,
I
it's so good. I love lettuce, but that is,
Now remember, when it comes to
That is some
lettuce,
good lettuce.
and nutrition, redder is better.
I know. I know.
So that's why there's some
Wow.
red. The red is really high in the phytonutrients.
Excuse me, we were talking a little bit about this on Tuesday night.
Crunchy, chewy.
Real brief, like a minute. This is more organically rich, correct?
I don't know what
Than
that
your normal lettuce.
It's-
more
it's high-
nutrients.
it's higher in nutrients.
Nutrient,
Yes.
yes. Than your normal lettuce, so
Yeah.
to speak. Yeah.
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 Because of all the research that Dr. Britz has done, okay, we will be able to give the lettuce exactly the light that they want
Okay.
when they want it,
Okay.
okay, so that they grow at an optimum, and that's the goal. And when you do that, they're very high in phytonutrients.
There you
Now,
go.
I'm gonna ask a dangerous question. How much more expensive is it than regular lettuce?
I think that's something that's kind of figure on later on. I think the basic point is they've got so much work they've got to do to kind of get that. That's like something you'll figure out like way down
It's
the
got to
road.
be competitive.
It wasn't
okay?
that
Yeah,
well,
and it will be.
It will, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will be competitive, I'm sure. It has to be. Matter of fact, Hayden was
Yeah.
telling me something about that when I was at taste testing with
I
him.
love this stuff.
So
It's really
we're,
good.
we're coming down to the end of this interview.
Yes.
So
I know.
Feel
Hand it
free.
over.
I'll tell you, I got to
Dig
tell you, the
in.
danger is once I've done this, if you get to my point, I cannot eat lettuce that's 3 days old anymore.
Oh, no.
okay.
Not a chance. I mean, I've gotten to that point. That's ready for the
What's the
compost
word?
pile.
Sure.
You know, it's got to be fresh or.
So
And I love the red stuff.
I do too.
take some more.
Galactic
Yeah.
is
Can I
wonderful.
Go on to their website. Thank you
you.
for joining Carousel. Come to the studio and join us with some lettuce.
No dressing
And
needed.
No dressing.
It's metrocrops.com. Go onto Facebook for Daphne.
And for
You can
Fairfield
find
Green
Daphne
Drinks.
for Fairfield Green Drinks. The next one will be in Stamford on January 23rd
Correct.
at 6 to 9. Back in Fairfield, February 5th, which is the first Tuesday of the month.
With Bike Walk Connecticut.
With who? Sorry?
Bike Walk Connecticut. It's all about walkable communities.
Oh, okay, right. So I'm going to be there.
Good.
So please join Daphne. It's free. Just come. It's just people getting together and talking about all kinds of fun stuff. Thank you for joining us. Go on to our website, lifeonthecarousel.com, Facebook as well. Have a great evening. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Daphne,
Thank you.
thank you. And thank you.